He swept the 1981 Grammys like a conquering hero, taking home 5 golden gramophones in one night, including Album of the Year, Record of the Year, Song of the Year, and Best New Artist. No artist had ever won those 4 major categories in a single ceremony. Christopher Cross stood on that stage, holding awards that put him in the company of legends, his soft-spoken Texas drawl thanking everyone who believed in him. The kid from San Antonio who'd been playing covers in local bars just 3 years earlier was now the most celebrated musician in America. Sailing had spent a week at #1, selling over 1 million copies. His self-titled debut album would go quadruple platinum, moving 4 million units and generating over $40 million in revenue. Warner Brothers executives were calling him their golden boy, predicting he'd be the label's cornerstone artist for the next decade. But here's what nobody talks about. By 1985, just 4 years after that historic Grammy sweep, Cross couldn't get his videos played on MTV. Radio stations that had put him in heavy rotation wouldn't touch his new singles. The same record executives who'd called him a genius were now suggesting he needed to lose weight, change his image, maybe wear tighter pants. The man who'd defined sophisticated pop music for a generation was being told he didn't look right for television. His third album lost the label over $2 million. By 1988, he was playing state fairs. Picture this scene. It's 1971 in San Antonio, Texas. Christopher Geppert, not yet Christopher Cross, is 20 years old, playing guitar in a cover band called Flash at a bowling alley lounge for $40 a night, 3 nights a week if he's lucky. His father sells cars at the local Chevrolet dealership. His mother works the register at Woolworth's. The family lives in a 2-bedroom house near Lackland Air Force Base, where the sonic booms from military jets rattle the windows twice a day. Chris's parents scraped together $300 for his first real guitar when he was 15, a Gibson acoustic they're still paying off in $20 monthly installments. This is where the dream starts, in the suffocating Texas heat, playing Proud Mary for drunk bowlers who don't even know he's there. But Chris has something most bar musicians don't have. He can hear arrangements in his head, full orchestrations with strings and harmonies that shouldn't exist in a bowling alley. He starts writing his own songs between sets, scribbling lyrics on cocktail napkins. The other guys in Flash think he's wasting his time. Nobody wants to hear original music, the drummer tells him. They want credence. They want 3 Dog Night. But Chris keeps writing, keeps hearing those arrangements. If you want to understand how someone can go from playing bowling alleys to winning 5 Grammys, you have to understand this moment. Click subscribe if you want to hear how dreams become reality, then become nightmares. By 1973, Flash had morphed into a new band, and Chris had convinced the others to play some originals. They were gigging 5 nights a week across South Texas, sleeping in the van, splitting whatever money they made 4 ways. On a good night, that meant $30 each. On a bad night, they played for free beer. Chris was living on peanut butter sandwiches and whatever leftovers the bar kitchens would give them. His weight started climbing because the only food he could afford was cheap and processed. The band would drive 200 miles for a gig that paid $150 total. Gas cost them $60. That left $90 to split 4 ways. $22.50 each for 8 hours of driving and 4 hours of playing. But something was happening in those Texas honky-tonks. People started requesting the originals, not just tolerating them, but actually asking for them. "Play that sailing song again," they'd shout. Chris had written Sailing in 1979, but an early version existed years before, crafted during those endless van rides between San Antonio and Houston. The song was about escape, about finding peace in imagination when reality was grinding you down. Every musician in every bar band knows that feeling. You're playing Mustang Sally for the 1,000th time while dreaming of something bigger. The difference was, Chris had captured that feeling in a song that would soon capture the world. In 1978, everything changed with one phone call. Michael Omartian, a producer who'd worked with Steely Dan, had heard Chris's demo tape through a friend of a friend of a friend. The tape had been passed around Los Angeles for months, mostly generating polite rejections. But Omartian heard something others missed. He heard those arrangements Chris had been carrying in his head since the bowling alley days. "Can you be in Los Angeles next week?" Omartian asked. Chris had $400 to his name. The flight cost $350. He booked it anyway, leaving himself $50 to survive in L.A. He slept on the floor of Omartian's studio for the first week. They started recording what would become his debut album, with Warner Brothers agreeing to front the money based on Omartian's reputation alone. The label gave them a budget of $200,000, which sounds like a lot until you realize studio time cost $500 an hour. They had to work fast, but Chris had been preparing for this moment for 7 years. Every arrangement was already complete in his head. He laid down "Sailing" in 3 takes. The engineer said it was the cleanest vocal he'd ever recorded. Nobody knew they were creating a song that would define an era. They were just trying to beat the clock before the money ran out. The album was finished in 6 weeks. Warner Brothers executives listened to it and shrugged. They heard soft rock in an era dominated by disco and punk. Then something unexpected happened that would change everything. A DJ in Orlando started playing "Ride Like the Wind" in February 1980. Within a week, the station was getting 300 calls a day requesting it. Other stations noticed. By March, it was spreading across the Southeast like wildfire. Warner Brothers, which had planned a minimal promotional budget, suddenly rushed the album into stores. They pressed 50,000 copies initially. They sold out in 10 days. They pressed 100,000 more. Those sold out in 2 weeks. "Ride Like the Wind" hit the Billboard Hot 100 in April 1980, climbing to number 2. It would have hit number 1, but Blondie's "Call Me" was in its 6th week at the top. Still, number 2 meant Chris was suddenly making more money than he'd ever imagined. The single was generating $30,000 a week in sales. His cut, after the label, producers, and managers took their shares, was about $3,000 a week, more money than his father made in 2 months selling cars. But the real explosion came with "Sailing." Released as the second single in June 1980, it did what "Ride Like the Wind" couldn't. It hit number 1 in August, staying there for a week. The song was everywhere, on every radio station, in every mall, playing from every car stereo. Chris went from sleeping on studio floors to staying in 5-star hotels. Warner Brothers was now calling him their priority artist. The transformation was jarring and would soon become destructive. The Grammy nominations came in January 1981. Christopher Cross was nominated in 5 categories, an almost unprecedented achievement for a debut artist. But Chris wasn't celebrating. He was in his hotel room in New York, throwing up from anxiety. The kid from San Antonio who'd played bowling alleys was now competing against Pink Floyd's "The Wall" for Album of the Year. His manager found him curled up on the bathroom floor at 3 a.m, convinced he was having a heart attack. It was a panic attack, the first of many. The pressure was crushing him. Warner Brothers had already spent $2 million promoting the album, and they expected returns. They wanted a follow-up album within a year. They wanted him to tour constantly. They wanted him to lose weight for the cameras. "You don't look like a rock star," an executive told him bluntly. "We need to fix that." They hired a stylist, a personal trainer, a media coach. Chris went along with it, even as it felt like they were erasing who he was. Then came February 25th, 1981, the Grammy Awards. When they called his name for Best New Artist, his legs almost gave out. Then Record of the Year for "Sailing." Then Song of the Year. Then Album of the Year. 4 major awards. The audience was on its feet. But all Chris could think about was how he'd have to live up to this moment forever. The backlash started immediately. Rock critics who'd ignored him now attacked him as everything wrong with popular music. Christopher Cross represents the death of rock, and "Roll," Rolling Stone wrote. His music is as exciting as watching paint dry. They called it yacht rock, meant as an insult, music for rich white people on boats. The punk and new wave movements were exploding, and here was Chris with his smooth voice and sophisticated arrangements, the antithesis of everything edgy or dangerous. But the real problem was about to emerge. MTV launched in August 1981, 6 months after his Grammy sweep. Suddenly, music needed a face, a look, an image. Chris was 5'8", overweight, balding at 30. He looked like an accountant, not a rock star. His label tried to hide him in his own videos, using sailing footage and abstract imagery instead of showing his face. When they finally did show him, the reaction was brutal. "That's what Christopher Cross looks like," became a running joke. DJ Howard Stern called him the ugliest man in music. The same songs that had conquered radio were now being rejected because of how he looked. Warner Brothers executives started suggesting he should consider letting someone else be the face of his music. Maybe hire an actor to lip-sync in videos. Chris refused, not out of pride, but because it felt like the ultimate betrayal of everything he'd worked for. The music was supposed to matter, not the image. In 1981, while dealing with the mounting pressure, Chris received another opportunity that seemed like a gift, but would become another chain around his neck. Director Steve Gordon approached him to write the theme song for his new film, Arthur, starring Dudley Moore. Chris collaborated with Burt Bacharach, Carol Bayer-Sager, and Peter Allen on what would become Arthur's theme, Best That You Can Do. The song was magic. Everyone could feel it in the studio. It perfectly captured the film's whimsical yet melancholic spirit. When Arthur was released in July 1981, the song exploded even bigger than Sailing. It hit #1 in October and stayed there for 3 weeks. It was generating $50,000 a week in sales. Chris's cut was substantial, nearly $8,000 weekly. The song would win the Academy Award for Best Original Song in 1982. Chris now had 5 Grammys and an Oscar. He was 30 years old and had achieved more than most musicians do in a lifetime. But here's what the success was hiding. Chris was drinking heavily, a bottle of wine before shows just to calm his nerves. He'd gained 40 pounds from stress eating. His marriage to his high school sweetheart was falling apart. She'd signed divorce papers the week he won the Oscar. The papers cited irreconcilable differences, but the truth was simpler. The man she'd married, the guy playing covers in San Antonio bars, was gone. Success had obliterated him. The second album pressure was unbearable. Warner Brothers wanted Christopher Cross Part 2, but they also wanted him to be more contemporary, more visual, more MTV-friendly. It was an impossible contradiction. How do you recreate a sound that critics already call outdated while also completely reinventing yourself? Chris spent 18 months on Another Page, released in January 1983. The label spent $3 million on production and promotion. They hired the hottest video directors, put him on a strict diet, even considered plastic surgery for his jawline. The lead single, All Right, peaked at number 12. The album peaked at number 11, respectable numbers for anyone else, but for someone who'd swept the Grammys 2 years earlier, it was seen as a catastrophic failure. The album sold 800,000 copies, less than a quarter of his debut. Warner Brothers lost over $1 million. The executives who'd called him their golden boy now wouldn't return his calls. The tour for Another Page told the real story. Venues that had sold out instantly in 1981 were now half empty. In Detroit, they moved him from a 15,000-seat arena to a 3,000-seat theater. In Cleveland, only 800 people showed up to a venue that held 4,000. The promoters were losing money. Several dates were quietly canceled. Chris was watching his career evaporate in real time, and everyone knew MTV was the reason. You could have the best songs in the world, but if you didn't look right on camera, you were finished. By 1983, MTV wasn't just influential, it had become the sole arbiter of pop music success. If your video wasn't in rotation, your song didn't exist. The channel's programmers had a simple formula: attractive young people doing interesting things on camera. Michael Jackson had just released Thriller, with its 14-minute video that was more like a short film. Madonna was scandalizing parents with Like a Virgin. Prince was becoming a purple-clad sex symbol. And then there was Christopher Cross, a balding, overweight 32-year-old from Texas. His label tried everything. They hired the director who'd done Duran Duran's videos. They spent $200,000 on a video for Think of Laura, using fashion models and exotic locations, keeping Chris's screen time to a minimum. MTV played it 3 times total, 3 times. Meanwhile, they were playing Hungry Like the Wolf 40 times a week. A MTV executive, speaking anonymously to Billboard, said the quiet part out loud: "Christopher Cross doesn't fit our demographic. Our viewers are 16 to 24. They want to see people they either want to be or want to sleep with. Cross is neither." That quote destroyed Chris when he read it. His music hadn't changed. His voice hadn't changed. His songwriting hadn't changed. But none of that mattered anymore. The industry had decided he didn't have the right face for the new world. He was being erased in real time, and there was nothing he could do about it. The financial reality hit hard in 1984. Chris had earned approximately $3 million from his debut album and another $1 million from Arthur's Theme. After taxes, manager fees, agent fees, and legal fees, he'd kept about $1.5 million. He'd bought a house in Austin for $400,000, cars for another $100,000, and spent lavishly thinking the money would keep flowing. By 1984, his income had dropped to less than $200,000 for the year. He still owed the IRS $300,000 in back taxes. His manager had been taking 20% of gross, not net, meaning Chris owed money on income he'd never actually received. He had to sell the Austin house at a loss, moving back into a 2-bedroom apartment, the same kind of apartment he'd lived in before the fame. His third album, Every Turn of the World, released in 1985, was a desperate attempt to modernize. The label brought in hot producers, used synthesizers, tried to make Chris sound contemporary. They spent $2 million on production. The album peaked at number 127. It sold less than 200,000 copies. Warner Brothers lost over $1.8 million. They dropped him from the label in 1986. The official statement said it was a mutual parting, but Chris found out from a Billboard article nobody even called him. 5 years after winning 5 Grammys, he was unsigned, broke, and forgotten. The speed of the collapse was staggering. The personal cost was even higher than the financial one. Chris's drinking escalated from wine to vodka, a fifth a day, by 1987. He was hospitalized twice for alcohol poisoning. His weight ballooned to over 300 pounds. He couldn't leave his apartment without people recognizing him as that guy who used to be famous. The cruelty was casual and constant. At a grocery store in Austin, someone shouted, "Hey, it's the yacht rock guy!" "What happened? Did your boat sink?" Chris left his cart full of food and drove home in tears. He tried writing new songs, but every label he approached had the same response. Great songs, but who's going to buy a Christopher Cross album in 1987? He was 36 years old and already being treated like a nostalgia act. The bitterness was eating him alive. He'd done everything right. He'd written great songs, sung them beautifully, won every award possible. But because he didn't look like David Lee Roth or Simon Le Bon, he was discarded. The music industry had revealed itself as something uglier than he'd ever imagined. It wasn't about music at all. It was about selling an image, a lifestyle, a fantasy. And Christopher Cross, the car dealer's son from San Antonio, wasn't anyone's fantasy. He thought about suicide more than once, sitting in his apartment with his father's old hunting rifle, wondering if anyone would even notice he was gone. Subscribe to hear how artists confront the abyss and what happens next. In 1988, Chris hit absolute bottom. He was playing a summer festival in Iowa, third on the bill below a Journey cover band. The check was for $1,500, less than he'd made per night in his debut tour. Halfway through Sailing, his signature song, the power cut out. While they fixed it, he could hear people in the crowd laughing, making jokes about his weight. When the power came back, half the audience had left to get beer. He finished the set to maybe 200 people, then went backstage and collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably. His keyboard player found him and said something that changed everything. "You're still alive, Chris. That's more than a lot of musicians from our era can say." It was true. The music industry was littered with casualties, but knowing that didn't make the humiliation any easier. He was sharing a motel room with his band to save money. The same man who'd stayed in presidential suites was now in a $40 a night room off the interstate. He made a decision that night. He could either drink himself to death, or he could accept what his career had become and find a way to live with it. He chose to live, barely. He got sober in 1989, checking into a rehab facility in Arizona. It took 3 attempts. The third time, it stuck. He'd lost everything else. He couldn't lose this fight, too. The 1990s were about survival, not success. Chris toured constantly, playing wherever would have him. County fairs, casino lounges, corporate events, cruise ships. The cruise ships were the most humiliating. Literal yacht rock on literal yachts, playing for retirees who remembered when he mattered. But it paid $5,000 a week, and he needed every penny. He was still paying off IRS debt from the 80s. He released albums on small labels that nobody heard. Back of My Mind in 1988 sold 30,000 copies. Rendezvous in 1992 sold even less. He tried collaborating with contemporary artists, but they treated him like a relic. One young producer said to his face, "I grew up making fun of your music." Chris wanted to hit him, but just smiled and said, "Yeah, a lot of people did." The worst part was playing Sailing every night, the song that had made him famous and then destroyed him. Audiences only wanted to hear the hits. If he played new material, they went to the bathroom, so he became a jukebox, playing the same 5 songs for 20 years. Sailing, Ride Like the Wind, Arthur's Theme, Think of Laura, All Right. 45 minutes of past glory, then back to the hotel to wonder how it all went so wrong. He was making maybe $100,000 a year, decent money for a normal person, poverty for someone who'd once earned millions. The cruelest irony came in the 2000s when yacht rock suddenly became cool again, ironically. Young hipsters were throwing yacht rock parties, dressing up in captain's hats and white suits, treating the music as camp. Chris's streams on Spotify started climbing. Sailing was in commercials, movies, TV shows, but the revival was built on mockery, not respect. He was invited to perform at yacht rock festivals where 20-somethings laughed at the music while singing along. They loved it because it was so bad it's good. Chris smiled through it all, taking the checks, dying inside. In 2005, he was sampled by a rap artist who turned Sailing into a song about selling drugs. The rapper made $2 million. Chris made $18,000 in royalties. He couldn't even sue because he didn't own his publishing rights. He'd sold them in 1987 when he needed money for rent. Warner Brothers had bought them for $200,000, a fraction of what they were worth. Those songs now generated over $500,000 a year in royalties. Chris saw none of it. He'd signed away his future for survival money, and the industry knew exactly what they were doing when they made the offer. A documentary filmmaker interviewed him in 2010 and asked if he had any regrets. Chris laughed bitterly and said, "How much time do you have?" The interview was never aired. Too depressing, the filmmaker said. By 2011, Chris had stabilized into a kind of resigned acceptance. He was 60 years old, sober for over 2 decades, playing 150 shows a year to audiences of 500 to 1,500 people. He'd remarried, divorced again, and was living alone in a modest house in Austin. His health was failing from decades of alcohol abuse and obesity. He had diabetes, high blood pressure, and chronic back pain from years of performing. But something shifted when he played Sailing Now. The song had outlived its association with him. It had become something bigger, a piece of collective memory that meant different things to different people. At a show in Dallas, a woman came up afterward crying, telling him Sailing had been played at her son's funeral. The son had loved the song, found peace in it during chemotherapy. Chris realized his music had a life beyond his career's rise and fall. It existed in moments he'd never know about, in places he'd never see. That was worth something, even if the industry had discarded him. He started playing with more heart, less bitterness. The songs deserved better than his resentment. In 2019, he was invited to perform on a yacht rock cruise, literally performing on a boat in the Caribbean. The irony was so perfect it transcended mockery. He was actually enjoying himself for the first time in decades when COVID-19 hit. The entire tour industry collapsed overnight. For Chris, it was almost a relief. COVID-19 nearly killed Christopher Cross, but not from the virus. In March 2020, he contracted a severe case that left him temporarily paralyzed. For 3 weeks, he couldn't walk, could barely move his hands. He lay in a hospital bed in Austin, unable to play guitar, the one constant in his life since he was 15. The doctors weren't sure if he'd fully recover. The paralysis was from Guillain-Barré syndrome, triggered by COVID. His nervous system was attacking itself. The metaphor was too obvious. His body was doing what the industry had done, destroying him from within. But slowly, painfully, he recovered. Physical therapy, learning to walk again at 69 years old. His hands came back last, the fingers remembering their positions on the fretboard. By October 2020, he could play again. He sat in his living room, alone, playing Sailing to an audience of none. It sounded different now, fragile but unbroken. He posted a video of it on Facebook. It got 12,000 views, more people than had come to his shows in years. Comments poured in from people who'd forgotten he was still alive. "This song saved my life once," someone wrote. "Thank you for surviving." Chris read every comment, crying at his computer. The pandemic had stripped everything down to its essence. The music remained when everything else was gone. Maybe that had always been enough. Maybe he'd just been too angry to see it. Subscribe if you believe music transcends the industry that creates and destroys it. Here's the truth nobody wants to admit. Christopher Cross won. Not the war he thought he was fighting, but the one that actually mattered. His music outlived every executive who rejected him, every MTV programmer who wouldn't play his videos, every critic who mocked him. Sailing has been streamed over 300 million times. It generates approximately $50,000 a month in royalties he'll never see, but that's not the point. The song exists beyond him now, beyond ownership or control. In 2023, at 72 years old, Chris played a festival in California. The crowd was maybe 800 people, a mix of original fans and their children. When he started Sailing, everyone sang along, word for word. A 20-something woman in the front row was crying. After the show, she told him her mother had died last year, and they'd played Sailing at the funeral because it was her favorite song. "She saw you in 1981, the woman said. She said it was the best concert of her life." Chris hugged her, this stranger connected to him through a song he'd written in a van, traveling between Texas honky-tonks. That's the victory. Not the Grammys gathering dust in storage, not the gold records he sold to pay bills, but this moment, this connection. The industry tried to erase him, and in every way that matters to the industry, they succeeded. But the music refused to be erased. It lives in wedding dances and funeral services, in car radios and streaming playlists, in the voices of people who weren't even born when MTV declared him irrelevant. The music industry wants you to believe success looks like 20-year-olds in leather pants, selling rebellion and sex to other 20-year-olds. They want you to believe that when you stop looking the part, you stop mattering. Christopher Cross is proof that's a lie. He matters every time someone finds comfort in sailing, every time Arthur's theme plays at a wedding, every time a cover band in a small town plays Ride Like the Wind, and the crowd goes wild. He's 72 now, still touring, still playing those same 5 songs to smaller and smaller crowds. His voice is rougher, his fingers slower, but the songs remain perfect. They were perfect when he wrote them in Texas bars, perfect when they conquered the world, perfect when the world moved on, and perfect now in their survival. The industry couldn't kill them. MTV couldn't erase them. Time couldn't diminish them. That's the real story of Christopher Cross. Not the rise and fall, but the endurance. He's still here, still playing, still sailing. The yacht rock joke became reality, an old man playing old songs on boats for old fans. But those fans remember when those songs were new, when they soundtracked first loves and last dances, road trips and rainy afternoons. That's worth more than MTV ever was. If you've stayed this long, you understand that music is bigger than the business. Subscribe to hear more stories of artists who survived their success and failure both. The music always wins in the end.